Have you seen the recent riots ripping across the UK? The UK is under threat, but it's not a foreign enemy who's out to destroy its towns and cities. It's the British citizens themselves. Violent mobs are out smashing and burning the streets and vandalizing property. But here's what will shock you. All it took was a piece of fake news to get them all shook up. Will a civil war break out in the UK? Join us as we dive deep into this bubbling volcano that is gripping the UK in a wave of racist violence. But first, let's trace it back to its chilling beginnings. Imagine a town just northwest of Manchester and Liverpool. It's in the town of Southport on Hart Street to be exact, where a brutal mass stabbing reared its ugly head. The incident occurred at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class and yoga event. What could have possibly turned out to be a fun-filled event was transformed into a scene of absolute horror and shock. A 17-year-old boy went on an all-out knife attack, ending the lives of 3 young girls. The victims were identified as Bieber King, who was just 6 years old, Elsie Stankham, a 7-year-old child, as well as Alice da Silva Aguirre, who was 9. Yet as heartbreaking as the incident was, this wasn't the only damage that was done. The criminal did not stop and went on to hurt 8 more children and 2 adults as well. All were critically wounded. The 17-year-old boy was eventually taken into police custody. To comply with the law, the police initially withheld his identity on legal grounds. As details about the young man slowly started to trickle, it was found that he was from Cardiff and his family originated from Rwanda. However, what no one knew was that a ferocious storm was brewing, one that would throw the UK into the worst kind of racist riots. And it all started with a lie. So what exactly happened? As people were reeling from the horrifying incident, you can only imagine the frenzy that took place on TikTok and social media. All kinds of theories were spewed onto the internet from all corners. In the absence of credible information, there was a gaping vacuum, and you know when that happens, right? The empty space provided the perfect opportunity for right-wing leaders such as Tommy Robinson to float all kinds of false narratives. And yes, the notorious Andrew Tate was part of this chaos too. Somehow, the misinformation that started to do the rounds on the internet was that this crime was committed by a migrant. What added fuel to the fire was that all kinds of untrue details were attached to Axel Ruda Kabenga, the stabber, whose identity was later made public. That he was an asylum seeker who had arrived on the English shores in a small boat, and the rumor mill didn't stop there. It was also said that his name was on the MI6 watch list. On his account, Andrew Tate posted a clip in which he said that the victims had been attacked by an undocumented migrant who had arrived on a boat. Tate also held the view, the soul of the Western man is so broken that when the invaders slaughter your daughter, you will do absolutely fucking nothing. There was even a rumor that the suspect's name was Ali al-Shakiti. This might be a good time to bring in Mark Owen Jones's research. Now, Mark Owen Jones is an associate professor. He teaches Middle Eastern studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha, and his research, well, that involves studying information control strategies. According to Mr. Jones, only a day had passed after the heinous incident when he was able to find about 27 million impressions stating or speculating that the attacker was Muslim, a migrant, a refugee, or foreigner. This is pretty significant. As if the situation wasn't bad enough, things nosedived even deeper for the agitated masses of the UK who took to the streets like a wild mob. Renowned author Richard Seymour, in an article, summed up the violence as a hallucinatory reaction based upon false inferences about someone's identity. Picture racist chants and slogans echoing across the streets as angry, disorganized mobs try to inflict chaos. The areas that bore the brunt of the protesters' attacks were Manchester, Liverpool, and Sunderland, Whitehall, Leeds, and Rotherham. But this was not all. Hull, Aldershot, Middlesbrough, and Belfast were not spared either. A mosque in Southport became a target. Things took an alarming turn when rioters angrily threw bricks at the mosque. The result, 50 injured police officers. The chairman of the mosque described the scene as terrifying. So how did it all unfold? Remember, Southport is the town where the tragedy struck. A vigil was held by the mourners for the victims. But in just a few hours, the flowers and notes were forgotten as mobs started to loot the shops. They even set a van on fire. The riots spread like wildfire, engulfing London and the rest of the UK in their flames. Scenes from London were one of utter chaos. Protesters headed close to Downing Street. The chants of "Save our kids" and "We want our country back" were heard loud and clear. But save them from whom? The protesters' demand was based on faulty thinking that the Rwandan was a Muslim immigrant. This was not the case. The UK government was quick to act, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer threatening the rowdy miscreants that they would feel the full force of the law. London's Metropolitan Police were not far behind, rounding up and taking 111 people into custody. Their offence? Causing violent disorder and assaulting police officers. While this is pretty shocking, what unfolded at Rotherham was nothing short of harrowing. Now, Richard Seymour also describes what happened at Rotherham, Middlesbrough, and other areas. A hotel was set on fire in Rotherham. Asylum seekers were staying at this hotel, which should come as no surprise. Rioters also took things up a notch in Middlesbrough and played a twisted game of traffic police. They not only blocked traffic, but only allowed those vehicles to pass which were driven by white and English drivers. Let's move on to Tamworth, where some bizarre scenes played out. Rioters crashed a refugee accommodation and left ugly graffiti behind, screaming hate messages such as "fuck packies" as well as "get out." Belfast also saw the worst of it. A lady with a hijab carrying a baby was struck in the face. The rioters also ransacked shops. Now, you can take the incidents at face value, but that will not be the wisest move, because what fuels these hate sentiments are much deeper problems. What you need to understand here is that the British public is grappling with some serious crises, financially, socially, and politically. Let's talk about that first. Wealth inequality is a cancer affecting the British people and is becoming a huge problem, especially for those who belong to the lower and bottom rungs of society. Take a look at these telling statistics. In 2021, the bottom 50% of the population owned less than 5% of the wealth. Now compare that to this other figure here. In a sharp contrast to those at the bottom, the top 10% of the UK own a whopping 57%. But that's not all. Let's go to this figure here. The top 1% hold an astonishing 23%. Now you can probably feel the frustration. Poverty is absolutely on the rise. According to the BBC, absolute poverty in the UK has skyrocketed, its steepest increase in the last 30 years. The figures were somewhere around 12 million in 2022-23. Add that to the UK's rising discontentment with their political class, and you've got a pot you don't want to stir, or things could definitely turn messy. These are people who have a black cloud of despair hanging over them, people who feel like they have lost their future. Against a backdrop of such misery, when leaders douse oil on racist sentiments, you end up with situations exactly this, with rioters out on the streets. Leaders such as Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage have been painting a negative picture of Muslims and migrants as a bad influence on British society for quite some time now. The good news, though, is that the snowballing effect of all these problems can push only a very small section of the general public to resolve their issues with violence, which is a bad strategy in any case, we might add. On some level, mainstream UK channels, as well as the Tories and Labour, have led to a negative perception of immigrants too. But it's not an issue that has sprung up overnight to wreak havoc in people's life either. We'll explain. The British far-right and Conservatives have been trying to capitalise and cash in on the idea of a migrant invasion for years now. Stopping the boats and mass immigration are typical carrots that are dangled before the disgruntled section of British society. Let's not forget that Labour talking points during the election campaign were replete with promises of increased deportations, along with shooting darts at the government for its liberal stance regarding immigration, as Richard Seymour elaborates in his analysis. But what is the way forward after experiencing the unrest? Perhaps some good has emerged from the riots that Britain experienced. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is already looking into ways to beef up international security and safety regulations. This action, of course, comes in the aftermath of the misinformation campaign that led to the rampant far-right riots that targeted immigrants. Still, the UK is not out of hot water. Around 400 people have been arrested and 100 charged. former First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Yousaf, is anxious about his family's future. He remains uncertain about the fate of his wife and 3 children in the UK. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, however, has remained firm as ever, vowing to treat the violence as a criminal activity. Even though things are shaky, some positive things are also blooming on the horizon. Anti-racist activists have joined hands to put an end to the barrage of racist attacks. In a show of solidarity with Muslims, the black community as well as asylum seekers, these brave activists thronged the streets. Now the slogans and chants of the anti-racist movements are very different from their opponents as they voice refugees are welcome here. What's even more encouraging is the fact that around 25,000 people joined these protests across Britain on one day alone. There were some other heartwarming scenes too. In Liverpool, an imam tried to cross barriers and bring out an understanding by bringing delicious goodies and sharing a bite with some rioters. The mosque that was vandalized in Southport received some unexpected help. A group of kind bricklayers helped to repair the damage that was done. It is only when the people seek to peel away the layers and address the root causes that divide can come together. Building bridges is the only lasting way to mend the cracks that divide society. What do you suggest is the way forward towards a better future? If you enjoyed the video, please smash that like button and hit subscribe.